This is Ground Affected.
My name is Brent.
And welcome to Painting for Absolute Nerds. And in this video, I'm going to show you how I painted this Tobey Maguire Spider-Man sculpted by 3D Wicked. Links are in the description below. Also, I totally have not got this standing on a coffee cup for you to see it. But with all that aside, let's just go over some minor details before we get straight into the video. Number 1, there is Patreon, link in description. Number 2, very importantly, like the video, type a comment in the bottom. Just type I like toast. Perfect. Number 3, make sure to click the subscribe button, because if you don't, you will find a spider in your bed or your 3D printer will probably fall apart. Number 17, if you did not like any of this, make sure to follow the instructions left for you at the end of the video. Also, I have websites and merch link store in the description. Now that we got that out the way, let's start off with the surface primer. This is one from Vallejo. The reason we use a surface primer is because this kind of paint is designed to stick to the surface below. This gives the paint that you spray on top of that, or paint on top of that, something to stick to. Starting off with a dark silver from Pro Acrylic, I'm going to start to paint the base. I'm also going to use a shining silver to help boost the brightness of that silver. I'm going to use a really large dry brush, and I'm going to dry brush the details on the base. This will get all over other places you don't want it to, so use a black to come back and tidy up the edges. I used the shining silver on its own to paint the emblem in the center of the base. Then using a Liquitex white ink, I'm going to spray a zenithal highlight. A zenithal is a white or a light gray highlight sprayed from the top down over the model. This is to duplicate the effect that the sun would have lighting a figure. I'm then going to dry brush the same silver with the same technique onto the octopus arm coming up the base. And now, starting with the body, I'm going to start out by just straight out painting the blue onto Spidey. I start off with a medium to dark blue. I'm going to come back and add shadows to this. I'm going to spray everywhere and make sure that I get absolutely good coverage before I start the next steps. The next steps will be using lighter blues progressively. Coming from the same direction as the zenithal, this helps give the illusion that light is bouncing off of the suit and makes a little bit more depth and volume in the piece. Going back to the base while everything dried, unfortunately I lost quite a lot of the footage of painting this rock. And since that's gone and I can no longer get it back, I'm just going to have to carry on from where I am now. So imagine I laid some paint down, laid a little bit more paint down. When dry brushing things like bases and stuff like that, there's two different types of brushes. A short bristle, small brush, or a soft, long bristle, big brush. And I use these for different effects. Obviously, you cannot fit the big one into smaller spaces, so when I need to fit it into a small space, I'll use the smaller brush. But the smaller one gives a harsher effect, and the bigger one gives a much softer effect that's not as pronounced. The larger the brush, the more it tends to catch the tips of the smallest details. The smaller the brush, the more it seems to be a lot more targeted and condensed in one area. I had painted a sandy color all over the sand bits that were on the base, and for the rocks, I'm going to go back with the Drakenhof Nightshade and I'm going to wash them down with this color. This gives a little bit more saturation into the piece. If I just used brown only, it would be a very dull, boring looking rock piece. So by adding that Drakenhof Nightshade, I've added color as well as darkened up the rocks. While that stuff dries, I'm going to spray down the base coat for the smoke that's coming out of the pumpkin bomb. And yes, I'm just spraying this willy-nilly. It don't really matter too much because you can come back later on and you can clean up whatever is sprayed over the edges as you're spraying on. Just be careful to not overspray too much. Going back to the rocks, I'm going to add some highlights into them as well by using the lighter skin tone that I have. This is something that I've learned over years of painting and drawing, that using white is going to desaturate the piece. So by using a light skin tone, it's not a white color, but it's going to appear to your eyes as looking like it's white. Once the base was done, I came back and I tidied up the entire edge around the rim. Now for the special fancy magic light from the bomb. I used Tesseract Glow, which is a technical paint from Citadel, and I sprayed this all over the area. Before I sprayed this, I laid down a super light grey halo, which would make the color lighter where the grey is and darker where the rocks were. This helps to create that illusion. Going into the top part of the smoke, I'm going to spray the exact same procedure as the lower smoke, which is a medium grey, and I'm going to slowly add more white to that grey as I build up the highlights on the smoke. Taking my time to do this, as using a white like this can become a little bit powdery, so make sure to thin it quite a bit and just build layer upon layer upon layer. While that was drying, I went back and I sprayed a sealant coat over the top of the blue that I had originally put down on Spidey. This is to protect it for the next steps I'm about to do. And of course, while that clear coat was drying, I went back to the base to add a tiny little bit more detail onto the base by dry brushing that same silver I used on the lower part of the base around the rim. And in order to paint the tower that Spidey is essentially being held on by, I used a bronze and a copper, and I mixed the two together to create a slight change in color as I was painting. I kind of just dipped between bronze and copper as I was going along without really any care to where I was putting that color. It's just so that there is a slight gradient or change in color as almost a way to kind of create a little bit of weathering effects on this tower pole pillar thing. Now for that special trick I was talking about. I'm going to use Vallejo liquid mask, and I'm going to mask off everything. In theory, I would have been better off just masking this off with masking tape or something similar. But I do find for this kind of project, I use liquid mask like this because it's really quick to do, and it really, in fact, it would take me a similar amount of time to paint this on as it would to mask it up anyway. So technically I didn't save any time, but I really enjoy using liquid mask. I used this gory red from Vallejo Game Air, and the reason that I use this is because it's slightly pinkish. So instead of having a pure red suit like I usually would make, it gives it a slightly velvety look, which I think this is the kind of thing that makes Toby's suit stand out differently from the other suits. I then used a brighter red and I spray this over the top where all the lights would hit the model. This is something that's quite a lot more broader, so I spray it all over the place. Then I start to direct the light a little bit more. Using an orange in the highest points where the light would hit, I'm going to spray almost a halo. This is going to line up the effect of adding the lightest color in later. And yes, it seems crazy, but I use a very thinned down yellow as the highest point of the highlight on this model. Once that had all dried, it's time to then remove the mask and make sure that you don't pull off any of the paint underneath, because that wouldn't be good for you and you'd be very upset, so don't do that. And once the mask is off, it's time to start the arduous task of painting 14 bazillion lines in black across the entire model. This is something that took me 74,000 years to do, and I have been doing this since the beginning of time. I used Drakenhof Nightshade in the seams of his suit. It doesn't dry as dark as it looks, but it does give a little bit of extra emphasis to those seams on his suit. And for his eyes, I'm going to paint them with a grey, and I'm going to highlight with a white and paint the blacks around the rims. On the base, I needed to paint the goblin bomb, so I painted it orange, and then I used the same Tesseract Glow technical color to spray the highlight that obviously came from the bomb itself. I also highlighted a little bit on the octopus arm. This is just to create a bit more atmosphere and make the light more believable. I added the little white dots of light that are around the outside of the front of the bombs, and then started to paint the webbing coming out of his hand. I started again with a grey, and whilst that was drying, I went back into the suit to carry on doing 4 kabillion zillion lines. Once the grey was dry, I can dry brush a white over the top of that and go back in with a white on a paintbrush and carefully, really specifically target where I want those highlights to be. now that we've got that out the way, hopefully you picked up a couple of tips that help you painting and printing your next models to the best of your abilities in the future projects that you have coming along. That made no sense. It doesn't matter, I'm keeping the line in anyway. And now that we're at the end of the video, of course, I do need to say a super huge thank you to the patrons who support the channel and keep things going. This is one of the easiest ways for you to support your favorite content creators, as well as, of course, if you join my Patreon, you do get nothing except you do actually get access to the Discord, where we speak about everything, including 3D printing and painting, but also other things sometimes. And speaking of such, I do need to thank the latest patrons who just recently joined: Lloyd Tillman, James Milne, Esther Russ, Caesar Rodriguez, and John Giardino. Thank you, my dudes, so much for the support. Of course, that support is super appreciated. This is the support that helps keep these lights blinding me every time I make a video. You would think I would change them, but this is what illuminates the face and makes the videos look super juicy. And if you've even made it this far in this video, make sure to click a like, leave a comment in the section below where they give you a space to leave comments in, as well as subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. And of course, if you have made it this far and nothing in this video was good enough for you, then there's only one thing I have left to say. And that is, please click the button that looks like this and just off. Do you think they'll even notice that I didn't paint the lines for the intro and the outro?